Welcome back to the Real Estate 401k Show. I'm your host, Mike Weinstein. I got Justin Frederick to my right, Ryan Gerdes all the way down at the end. And we are joined by a very special guest who's going to be with us all week long, Jay Josephs with the Josephs Appraisal Group. One of the things that we specialize in is whether somebody's buying a home or selling a home is truly explaining the entire process, what really is going on behind the scenes. And when you're a buyer, you learn really quickly, if you don't know, that somebody, and probably you, is going to be paying for an appraisal. And you may not exactly know what that is and exactly what is going on with that. And so, Jay, want to appreciate and say thank you for joining us, and two, go ahead and apologize for anything that Ryan says.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't need to apologize. Yeah, we're good.
No apology needed.
He smiled and laughed whenever we were saying stuff.
It's a safe zone, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Judgment-free zone.
As long as you're over 18.
All the listeners know how Ryan is.
Well, let's break it down. On this episode, Jay, I want to talk about appraisals from the buyer's perspective. And I think the first question a buyer would have, because appraisals aren't necessarily the cheapest thing, but they are oftentimes, well, not oftentimes, they're pretty much always required when a buyer is obtaining a mortgage to buy a house. What are they paying for, and what are they getting in an appraisal, and what really do you do?
Yeah. So first, I have a stat for all of you guys. I don't know if you know this, but I do business. I used to consult with an international appraisal management company, and they have a historic rate of coming in low on appraisals, coming in below the contract price about 6% of the time. So a low percent. And I will get to your question, I promise.
That's all right.
The last 2 months, 20% of the time. So we're in a market right now where appraisers, to a certain extent, are protecting buyers from paying too much. I'm not sure why it's happening, but that is a big jump in appraisers coming in low, right? In terms of
6 to 20%. That's the jump.
That's a huge
that's
jump.
in 60 days.
That's huge.
Okay.
I don't have an answer for it, in the sense that I've seen those numbers a long time ago when we were in a market that was going up at a rate that we couldn't fathom, 3-4% a month. I understood appraisers couldn't keep up because we were looking at historic data and things were moving so fast. We have over 26,000 listings now in Arizona Regional MLS. People shouldn't be paying too much, but yet those are the numbers. 60 days, and it's an international sample size. Like, it's not just a few deals in Phoenix. So just something to think about.
So you're telling me during a seller's market, there is a lower percentage of appraisals coming in low than there is in a buyer's market? Well, I mean, we're not full-fledged buyer's market, but can we all agree that we're comfortably in one?
I feel like
I would
right.
rather be a buyer than a seller.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so now appraisers are across the board giving lower appraisals in a buyer's market?
It seems weird.
Explain the logic.
Again, it doesn't make sense to me in the sense that buyers have a lot of choices. Buyers should be getting good guidance from the realtors to say, we don't need to overpay. I'm just reporting facts. This is one of those things that I've tried to dissect. And
maybe what's happening is we're trying to increase purchase price to bring in concessions.
Concessions for sure have something to do with it.
Rate is everything.
Fair.
So maybe that's the play that's happening right now. Maybe they're, and I haven't seen a lot of this, but I haven't seen any low appraisals on my end.
No.
Triple knock that. But maybe the strategy of the listing agents have been, let's put a high price and then include verbiage that we're going to give 3, 4, 5% concessions
For
maybe.
rate buy down,
Yeah.
et cetera.
I don't know.
And I'll let you get back to answering that question. I just got locked up on that.
It's interesting.
For sharing that. Yeah,
it's an interesting point. So in terms of what you're getting as a buyer, you're getting a neutral third-party opinion of value. And there are a lot of times when you'll get an appraisal waiver, right?
Yeah.
You call it value acceptance, where Fannie Mae looks at you, or FHA or whatever it is, looks and says, hey, you're such low risk, we're going to waive the appraisal for the most part. And I would tell you, even in those cases, that doesn't mean for sure that you're getting a great deal. And one of the things specifically I think that an appraiser adds to the process for a buyer that I think is really important is measuring the house. Mm-hmm. I have a story where an investor bought a house for cash. County said 2,400 square feet, bought it, fixed it up, spent a ton of money on it, put it back on the market, went in escrow, 1,600 square feet.
Oh my goodness.
There was no safeguard there. And I will tell you this, when I did yesterday on Osborne, the county records say it's 2,300 square feet, 1,666. It was a cash purchase. They hired us to do the appraisal, and
Well worth the money.
the county included a garage and a workshop and a storage area in the square footage. Shouldn't have done that. And so I think that that's not our, when a lender hires us, they're hiring us to protect the lender, right? But in reality, a good appraiser is protecting the buyers too.
Both sides, yeah.
Ryan had mentioned the word, or it might have been Justin, mentioned the word concessions. So, and as buyer's agents, we are trained, and really honestly, if you are working with an agent right now, I think one of the questions that you need to ask when you interview them is, what do they prepare for the appraiser? Do they just let the appraiser go out there, appraise the property, and just hope for the very best? Or do they have a packet that they're leaving at the property for the appraiser, and what is in that packet? Great. So my question, since the topic of concessions came up, with the way that the market is and appraisals are seeming to 20% lower right now, is that something as an appraiser you need to know, want to know, and impact you? If I'm representing a buyer, and or even the seller for that matter, I might be on the listing side wanting to make sure you have this information. If the property's, the contract price is $400,000, and now we're kind of, but we've got 3% in seller concessions, is that something that you would want to know and that you would factor into the appraisal?
It's a good question, but the short answer is no. If you were to look at an appraisal and look at page 2, the sales grid of an appraisal, we don't adjust the subject. All we're doing is adjusting the comps. So in reality, it doesn't matter to me if the subject has seller concessions or is selling furnished or is selling for $550,000. None of that is supposed to matter. All we're doing is analyzing the comps. And so there's no adjustments for seller concessions. I like to know. And if I'm appraising a house in the transaction as 4% seller concessions, and I'm struggling, wondering why I'm coming in below the contract price, that helps explain it. But it should have zero impact on what the house is worth.
I got a follow-up question, because I get it all the time from buyers when we're talking about appraisals. You had defined an appraisal as a neutral third-party opinion of value, right?
It's good. Yeah.
So that being said, what do you need the contract for?
I would rather not have it. And in some countries, like in Australia, which was a company that eventually bought our appraisal management company, unless something's changed recently, they don't give the appraiser the contract. You guys would hate it if we didn't have the contract, because you would have a deal where you're in escrow at $610,000 and an appraiser would come in at $608,000. Like, you would have more deals come in low. What I like that Australia does, at least they used to do, is they don't give you the contract. They just want an honest, objective, neutral opinion of value, and then the underwriter has the ability to go 2% over the appraisal. So that would be fair. Then you're relying on something, and then you could make a decision, hey, this borrower's great, he's super solid. We can loan $10,000 above the appraisal.
I like that. I wish that was.
We are in studio with Jay Josephs from Joseph's Appraisal Group. If you want to learn more about the appraisal process, maybe you're buying a very unique home and you want to hire an appraisal, or you are selling a home and you want to get an appraisal on your property before you put your house on the market. All you got to do is text J to 623-AZ-RECON. That's J to 623-AZ-RECON. All right. Is this true or false? Because one of the common questions that I get from buyers is, we got a contract price of $600,000, and more times than not, the appraisal comes in at the contract price, and so they don't understand. They get confused and they think, okay, well, at least I'm getting a fair shake on this.
Right.
I always explain it to them that really, in my opinion, the appraiser's job is to, in part, justify the contract price if they can justify it. And by the look on your face, I'm about to get smacked. I get that look from my wife.
I felt the same way.
I promise you,
and you always deserve it.
this is a different look for sure. I promise that. There are appraisers out there that I think believe that's their job. And I would say 80% of the time when you see an appraised value that's exactly the contract price, that's what they're doing. And they feel like, all right, I've done my job, on to the next deal. I'm different in that respect because if you're an escrow at $600,000 and I think it's worth 600 to 605 or something, I'd rather appraise it at 605 because when you get the appraisal, instead of saying, oh, came into the contract price, we don't know if that's right or wrong, you're like, oh, this is the guy's actual opinion of value. And so there certainly are people that do that, which is why I said you would hate it if appraiser didn't get a copy of the contract. But I think it reduces the credibility in my profession. How many times have you seen it where it's exactly that? You don't know if that's what it's worth.
Right. And I would say 80% of the time, we're probably seeing exactly what the value is.
It's a bummer. It's
what
a
the
bummer.
purchase price
And
is.
that's why like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have started to de-emphasize appraisals because they don't trust us anymore because there's too many of those appraisers out there. It's their job to hit a contract price. And the reality is appraisers have to work a lot harder when they come in low because we get these requests for reconsideration that sometimes are so time consuming that appraisers are like, look, I got to keep the lenders happy. Just easier to come in the contract price. But again, it's been terrible for our profession.
Now, I've only had this happen once in my career, but this was during a time when, the market was at its absolute lowest. And we're not in a low market now, but again, we are more in a buyer's market. Have you ever had a buyer challenge the value that you came in with?
Saying it was too high or too low? Because
Too
I've
high.
seen both. Yeah,
saying that it came in too high because a lot of times they'll use that appraisal element of the contract to renegotiate the price.
So I've been in situations like that multiple times. And for any realtors out there, and you guys, don't do that. Don't leave the negotiating to the appraiser. It makes for a real awkward position. I think that there are times when the underwriter wouldn't allow that request for reconsideration to even go to the appraiser. You're signing a contract. If you're not willing to pay that price, don't sign that contract.
For sure.
And that's a realtor giving bad advice to the buyer.
For sure.
Yeah,
But I've had it happen one time. I was on the listing side, but the buyer came along and challenged the value, and it came in at value, and they said no, we
want it lower.
We want it lower so that we can renegotiate with your seller.
That's crazy. And what does that do to and so let's just follow that through. If the realtor or if the appraiser did that and lowered the value, how credible is that to the seller? The seller would be like, I have his signature on another value. I'm not going to trust this guy.
Yeah.
I just
that's
had
brutal.
one. I just had one. Got a property inspection waiver, and guy was like, "No, I want to pay for the appraisal. The home's overvalued. The appraisal came in $10K over purchase price, so
did.
it was
Yeah.
So
So now he has egg on his face.
yeah,
Wow.
Yeah.
All right. So as a buyer, they receive a copy of the appraisal.
They have to.
They have to,
Yeah, mandated.
and it typically gets emailed to them. What are they looking at, and what should they be looking at? Because it's a complicated report for agents, right? You did a class for us a couple weeks ago, and I learned a ton.
I'm glad.
I mean, it just all the coding, but we don't need to get into the weeds with that for the average buyer. But what are some things that they need to be looking at and to understand what they are looking at?
So first, I think good realtors, you guys,
No need for name calling.
should know how to read an appraisal. Like, I don't expect the typical buyer who maybe, doesn't ever see appraisals, but I think that you want to work with a realtor who says, hey, send me a copy of that appraisal when you get it so we can go over it together for sure. The short version of it is we're taking properties that have sold and then reconciling them to equate it to a value for the subject property. So we're adjusting for things that we think a typical buyer would have a reaction to. Like if the subject has a pool and comp 1 doesn't have a pool, we need to analyze what that pool is worth and then make an adjustment to that sales price to account for it. And then we redo that process 5, 6, 7, 8, however many comps we have. But I do think the best thing you can do is work with a realtor who's taken our class or who in other ways have been educated so that they can explain it to you. It's just, it's hard to understand, right? Like we have a 3-hour class and at the end of it, I still get people asking me questions about them.
And we've been seeing more short sales come up in the market. And we were literally just talking about this right before you came into studio. And so, I mean, I have my definition, but can you quickly explain what the difference between an appraisal and a BPO is?
So brokers' price opinions can be performed by realtors. And I have a set of standards that's 300, 400 pages of what I need to do. My obligations when I give a value. You guys don't have that. Realtors don't have that. And so, and there can be bias. Like I've seen clear bias in a broker's price opinion. I see that all the time.
Right.
As appraisers, we're not allowed to be biased. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I wouldn't trust sorry guys, I would not trust a broker's price opinion.
Nor do I. But,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. So no, I think that's banks in a lot of cases just trying to go the cheapest route. Like on a foreclosure, pre-foreclosure, they just, they can get realtors to do it for $25, $50 knowing they might get the listing on it. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of those at all. I think they're misleading.
Sure.
All right, we are in studio with Jay Josephs from Joseph's Appraisal Group. If you'd like some more information about his company and how you can find them, all you got to do is text the word J to 623-AZ-RECON. That's J to 623-AZ-RECON. All right, as we wrap up, so we're talking about buyers. When would a buyer hire you individually?
Yeah.
So, outside of the mortgage
process.
the
Yeah.
loan process.
So look, I think the normal thing is when you get that appraisal waiver, often they're like, oh, I just saved $500. And they don't think about the concept of, wait a minute, but look at what I'm giving up. I'm giving the rights to get the house measured, the rights to get a neutral opinion value. Look, there's some times where you can look at the comps and feel great about what you're paying, if you're in a tract home subdivision. And I don't think you need an appraisal in those cases. Maybe get the house measured. But I think if you're paying cash or you get
that's
an
a good
appraisal
point.
waiver.
A lot of people, because they're paying cash, don't get the appraisal.
Yeah, and those are those are the scenarios where, I see some really bad decisions made. And so for first-time buyers, I don't think they get as many waivers probably, I'd guess.
No, very little.
Yeah, but on first-time buyers, I think you should go through a full process which includes an appraisal. Like I'm one of those, I know I'm biased on this, but I think good appraisers add value to a transaction. And I think that I think that if a realtor is working with a first-time buyer and Justin gives them an appraisal waiver, that they should have a form where they're kind of saying, look at all we're giving up. Let's make sure you don't want to do an appraisal. Oh, and I did one question for you actually on that. On an appraisal waiver, if they say I still want to get an appraisal, would they order that on their own or still through you?
We still order it.
I think that's better.
And we do have a form for an appraisal waiver.
Do you really?
Yeah.
That they acknowledge what they're giving
They have
up.
to acknowledge.
Has it ever blown up in their face?
Yeah, I was about
It
to say.
has. It has. But I mean, that's what
That's
Jay's
the
point
purpose.
is.
Yeah.
And just like you were saying about cash, I just like you were talking about earlier when you had an investor that purchased a home. What a big deal that is. What a small price to pay to find out that the home was way smaller than what was expected.
It was unbelievable to the point
Yeah.
where the last conversation I had, I was sure that she was going to sue somebody.
Yeah.
All right, we always ask this when we have attorneys on. What's your best appraiser joke?
I have none. I have none. There's nothing funny about my
Do
business.
you have one?
No.
I'm surprised.
You guys are way funnier
All
than me.
right, huge thanks to Jay Josephs with Joseph's Appraisal Group. If you'd like to learn more about his company, you'd like to hire his company or have questions about the appraisal process, all you got to do is text the word J to 623-AZ-RECON. That's J to 623-AZ-RECON.